Everything you know about Vikings is wrong. The horned helmets never existed. The savage barbarians who only pillaged and burned, that's Hollywood fiction. The primitive warriors with no culture, completely backwards. Vikings were traders, poets, democratic lawmakers, and some of the cleanest people in medieval Europe. They gave women more rights than most societies would for another 1,000 years. They discovered America 500 years before Columbus, and they had better hygiene than the knights who fought them. Today, we're destroying the Hollywood myths and revealing 10 shocking things Vikings actually did. Things that movies will never show you, because the truth is far more interesting than the fiction. Let's start with something that's going to blow your mind.
Number 1. Vikings were obsessed with personal hygiene. When you think of Vikings, you probably picture filthy, smelly warriors covered in dirt and blood, right? That's what every movie shows. Grimy men with matted beards, never bathing, living in squalor. The reality? Vikings were cleaner than almost anyone else in medieval Europe. Archaeological evidence shows that Vikings bathed at least once a week, which was considered excessively clean by medieval standards. They had Saturday specifically designated as bathing day. The Old Norse word for Saturday, laugardag, literally means washing day. But it gets better. Excavations of Viking settlements have uncovered grooming tools everywhere. Combs, razors, tweezers, ear cleaners. Vikings carried personal grooming kits with them. We've found more grooming implements in Viking graves than weapons in some cases. They styled their hair. They trimmed their beards carefully. This wasn't the wild, unkempt look movies show. They even used the form of soap made from animal fat and wood ash. And they bleached their beards. Blonde was fashionable, so darker-haired Vikings would lighten their beards using lye. English chroniclers, people writing about Viking raids, complained that Viking men were too attractive to English women because they bathed regularly and groomed themselves. One Anglo-Saxon writer bitterly noted that Vikings combed their hair daily, bathed weekly, and changed their clothes regularly, which made them irresistible compared to the local men who didn't do any of those things. Think about that. The savage barbarians were cleaner than the civilized people they raided.
Number 2. Vikings gave women more rights than most modern societies. Hollywood Vikings are all about the men. Fierce warriors, brutal fighters, masculine conquerors. Women are background characters, victims, prizes, or occasionally a shield maiden thrown in for diversity points. Real Viking women had rights that European women wouldn't gain for another 1,000 years. Viking women could own property independently. They could inherit land. They could divorce their husbands. And this is crucial for specific legal reasons, including if he was abusive, if he was too poor to support the family, if he insulted her family, or even if she just wanted to. When a Viking woman divorced, she took her dowry back, plus half of the household wealth. Her husband had no say in this. The law sided with women in divorce proceedings more often than men. Women ran the household, but household meant something different in Viking society. When men went on trading voyages or raids, which could last months or even years, women managed everything: the farm, the finances, the slaves, business dealings, legal matters, everything. We found graves of wealthy Viking women buried with keys, large, ornate keys worn at the waist. These weren't just symbolic. These keys represented real power. They unlocked storage buildings, treasure chests, food stores. The key bearer controlled the household's resources, and that person was usually a woman. Viking women could also be merchants and traders. We have historical records of women conducting business independently, owning ships, and leading trading expeditions. Some became wealthy in their own right. Now, were there female Viking warriors? This is controversial. We found some female graves with weapons, but scholars debate whether these women actually fought or if the weapons were symbolic. But here's what we know for certain. Whether or not women fought regularly in battles, they absolutely had more legal rights, economic power, and social freedom than women in Christian Europe at the same time. A woman in Viking Age Scandinavia had more autonomy than a woman in England, France, or Germany. Let that sink in. The barbarians treated women better than these civilized Christian societies.
Number 3. Vikings were poets and storytellers. Every Viking movie shows them as illiterate brutes who only understand violence, grunting warriors who solve everything with axes. Vikings were actually obsessed with poetry. They had professional poets called skalds who held high status in Viking society. These weren't just entertainers, they were historians, propagandists, and artists. A good skald could make you famous forever. A bad poem could destroy your reputation. Viking poetry was incredibly complex. They used intricate forms with strict rules about meter, rhyme, and alliteration. One form, drotkvat, is so complicated that modern scholars struggle to compose in it. Vikings memorized and recited these poems flawlessly. They composed poetry about everything. Battles, yes, but also about love, loss, travel, the beauty of landscapes, the changing seasons, even jokes and insults. Insult poetry was a whole genre. Vikings would have flighting contests, basically medieval rap battles where they'd try to out-insult each other in verse. And here's something movies never show. Vikings sitting around fires at night reciting sagas. These weren't just stories, they were oral histories that preserved their culture, genealogies, and values. The sagas were memorized and passed down through generations before finally being written down in the 13th century. The sagas we have today, stories like the saga of Eric the Red, the stories of the Volsungs, the stories of Ragnar Lothbrok, these were originally oral compositions that Vikings memorized in their entirety. We're talking about narratives that can fill entire books, recited from memory. Vikings valued clever wordplay as much as skill in battle. A warrior who couldn't compose a good poem was considered incomplete, no matter how brave he was in combat.
Number 4. Vikings practiced democracy before most of Europe. Movies show Viking society as ruled by brutal warlords and tyrants. Might makes right. The strongest man leads. Vikings actually had one of the earliest forms of democratic government in Europe. They held assemblies called things, local gatherings where free men and in some cases women could vote on laws, settle disputes, and make collective decisions. These weren't just symbolic. The thing had real power. The most important was the Althing in Iceland, established in 930 CE. This is one of the oldest parliaments in the world, and it's still Iceland's parliament today. At the Althing, representatives from different regions would gather, debate laws, settle legal disputes, and make decisions affecting the entire society. Here's what's remarkable. At the Thing, you could challenge anyone, regardless of their status. If a wealthy Jarl wronged you, you could bring a case against him. If you had a legal dispute, you presented your case, witnesses testified, and the assembly voted. They didn't have kings in the traditional sense for much of Viking history. They had jarls, local leaders, but these men ruled with the consent of free men. A jarl who became too tyrannical could be removed. This wasn't absolute monarchy. It was closer to representative government. Viking law was incredibly detailed. They had laws about everything: property rights, inheritance, marriage, divorce, trade agreements, murder, theft, insults. And these laws were memorized by law speakers, people whose job it was to recite the entire law code from memory at the Thing each year so everyone knew their rights. Compare this to medieval England or France, where kings ruled by divine right and peasants had zero say in governance. Vikings were practicing democracy while most of Europe lived under absolute monarchy.
Number 5. Vikings were master traders, not just raiders. Hollywood focuses obsessively on Viking raids, violent attacks on monasteries, burning villages, stealing treasure. That's the only story we ever see. But Vikings spent far more time trading than raiding. Viking trade networks stretched from North America to the Middle East. They traded with the Byzantine Empire, with Arab merchants, with Slavic peoples, with the Franks, with the Anglo-Saxons. We found Arabic coins in Viking graves in Sweden. We found Viking goods in Constantinople. They were the international merchants of medieval Europe. What did they trade? Everything. Furs from the north, sable, ermine, fox, amber from the Baltic, walrus ivory. Slaves, unfortunately. This was a major part of their economy. Timber, iron, but also manufactured goods, weapons, jewelry, textiles. They established trade cities, Dublin, York, Novgorod, Kiev. These weren't just raiding bases, they were cosmopolitan trading hubs where Vikings lived alongside locals, intermarried, and conducted business. The famous Viking longships? Yes, they were used for raiding, but they were primarily designed for trade. Their shallow draft allowed them to navigate rivers deep into continental Europe, reaching markets that other ships couldn't access. Vikings could sail up rivers to trade directly with inland settlements. Recent analysis shows that for every Viking raid, there were probably dozens of peaceful trading expeditions. But peaceful trade doesn't make for exciting movies, so we only hear about the violence. Vikings were businessmen, sophisticated traders who understood markets, currency exchange, and international commerce. They weren't primitive barbarians. They were economic opportunists who used violence when it served their purposes, but preferred profit through trade when possible.
Number 6. Vikings explored further than almost anyone else in their era. We know Vikings raided England and France. Movies show that constantly. But the scope of Viking exploration is almost never depicted accurately. Vikings reached North America around 1000 CE, 500 years before Columbus. We have archaeological proof of Viking settlement at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland. They called the continent Vineland, but they went everywhere. Vikings sailed down European rivers and reached the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. They traded in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, where some Vikings served as elite bodyguards for the Byzantine emperor in a unit called the Varangian Guard. They explored deep into Russia. The word Russia might even come from Rus, which possibly refers to Vikings. They founded cities like Novgorod and Kiev. They sailed to Greenland and established settlements that lasted for centuries. Eric the Red colonized Greenland, and his son, Leif Erikson, reached North America. They raided and traded along the Mediterranean coast. Vikings attacked settlements in what's now Spain, France, Italy, and North Africa. Their exploration wasn't haphazard, it was systematic. They mapped coastlines, identified trade routes, and established settlements. They were navigators on par with any civilization of their era, using sophisticated techniques including sunstones, crystals that could locate the sun even in cloudy conditions, detailed mental maps, and careful observation of ocean currents and bird migrations. The Viking world stretched from North America to Central Asia. That's roughly 1/3 of the known world. No movie has ever captured this scale.
Number 7. Vikings were master craftsmen and artists. Movie Vikings hit things with hammers. They're shown as crude, primitive people with no sophistication. Viking craftsmanship was extraordinary. Their metalwork was among the finest in medieval Europe. They created intricate jewelry using techniques like filigree and granulation, tiny beads of gold or silver soldered onto surfaces to create detailed patterns. This required incredible precision and skill. Viking swords weren't just functional, they were works of art. The best swords had pattern-welded blades, created by forging together different types of iron and steel to create blades that were both flexible and hard. The resulting patterns looked like flowing water or serpents. And these patterns weren't just decorative. They indicated a superior blade. These swords had names. Vikings named their weapons like we name pets or children. Famous swords appear in sagas with their own histories and reputations. Viking wood carving was elaborate. They carved intricate designs into ships, buildings, furniture, and everyday objects. The Oseberg ship, a Viking ship discovered in Norway, is covered in detailed carvings of animals, geometric patterns, and mythological scenes. They created complex tapestries and textiles. The Bayeux Tapestry, which depicts the Norman conquest of England, the Normans were descendants of Vikings, shows the sophistication of medieval textile work that Vikings contributed to. Viking art had distinctive styles that evolved over centuries. Oseberg style, Bora style, Jelling style, Mammen style, Ringerike style, Ern style, each with different motifs and characteristics. This wasn't primitive art. This was a sophisticated artistic tradition with schools, styles, and master craftspeople.
Number 8. Vikings integrated and assimilated rather than just conquering. Movies show Vikings as destroyers. They raid, they burn, they leave. Pure violence, no connection to the places they attack. Vikings actually integrated into local societies everywhere they went. In England, Vikings didn't just raid, they settled. The Danelaw was a region of England under Viking control where Vikings and Anglo-Saxons lived together, traded, intermarried, and blended cultures. Many English place names ending in by, Thorpe, or Thwaite are Viking in origin. In Normandy, France, Vikings settled so successfully that the region is named after them. Normandy means land of the Northmen. Within a few generations, these Vikings had adopted French language and customs while retaining some Norse traditions. Their descendants conquered England in 1066. In Ireland, Vikings founded Dublin and other cities. They intermarried with Irish people to the point where genetic studies show significant Viking ancestry in Ireland. The culture that developed was Norse Gaelic, a blend of both traditions. In Russia, Vikings, called Rus, blended with Slavic populations and eventually became indistinguishable from them, founding the Russian state. Vikings were cultural chameleons. They adapted to local conditions, adopted useful customs, learned languages, and integrated while maintaining their identity. This isn't the behavior of mindless raiders. This is sophisticated colonization and cultural exchange. Yes, they used violence initially to establish themselves, but then they settled, farmed, traded, married locals, and became part of the societies they'd attacked. Most Viking descendants today have no idea they have Norse ancestry because their ancestors integrated so thoroughly.
Number 9. Vikings used sophisticated legal codes and valued justice. Movies show Vikings as lawless. Might makes right. Violence settles everything. Vikings had detailed legal systems more sophisticated than many contemporary societies. We've already mentioned the thing assemblies, but the laws themselves were remarkable. Viking law distinguished between different types of crimes and had proportional punishments. Murder had different penalties depending on circumstances. Was it premeditated? Was it in self-defense? Was it during a drunken brawl? They had the concept of weregild, literally man payment. If you killed someone, you owed their family compensation. The amount depended on the victim's social status. This wasn't perfect, it valued people differently, but it prevented endless blood feuds. Instead of revenge killing after revenge killing, families could accept payment and end the cycle. Viking law recognized different types of theft, different types of assault, different types of insult. Yes, insults were legally actionable. If someone publicly humiliated you, you could bring a case. Honor was legally protected. They had trial by ordeal for unclear cases, but they also had trial by testimony, where witnesses would vouch for someone's character or account of events. Your reputation mattered legally. People known as honest had more credible testimony. Women could bring legal cases. Slaves had some legal protections. You couldn't kill your slave arbitrarily. There were rules.
Foreigners trading in Viking territories had legal rights protecting their property and persons. Vikings valued justice enough to create systems to deliver it. This isn't barbarism, this is civilization.
Vikings were pragmatic about religion, not fanatics. Movies show Vikings as fanatic pagans who worshipped Norse gods violently and hated Christianity with burning passion. Vikings were religiously flexible and pragmatic. Yes, they worshipped Norse gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and others, but their approach to religion was surprisingly casual. They didn't have organized churches or required rituals. Religion was personal and practical. You made offerings to gods when you needed help, but there was no rigid dogma. When Vikings encountered Christianity, many converted without much resistance. But here's the interesting part. Many Vikings hedged their bets. They'd worship Christ, but also keep praying to Thor, just in case. Some wore both Christian crosses and Thor's hammer pendants. Archaeological finds show Vikings who were buried with both Christian and pagan symbols. They were covering their bases. If Christian heaven exists, great. If Valhalla exists, also great. Why not try for both? Vikings converted to Christianity gradually and pragmatically. It wasn't forced conversion by the sword, though there was some of that. Often, it was because Christianity offered advantages, better trade relations with Christian Europe, alliances with Christian kingdoms, access to literacy and record-keeping that the church provided. Some Viking leaders converted for purely political reasons and didn't really practice. Others converted genuinely. Many people blended both religions for generations. This wasn't religious fanaticism. This was practical spirituality. Vikings cared about results, not orthodoxy. If praying to the Christian God brought good harvests and successful voyages, then fine, they'd pray to Christ. If Thor's hammer also helped, they'd keep that too.
So there you have it. 10 things Vikings actually did that movies never show you. Does this sound like the Vikings you see in movies? No, because Hollywood needs simple narratives. Savage barbarians, mindless violence, primitive warriors. The truth is more complicated and more interesting. Vikings were sophisticated people living in a brutal age. They used violence when it served them, but they also traded, created art, made laws, explored, and built societies. They were fully human, capable of cruelty and compassion, violence and sophistication, destruction and creation. We've reduced them to a caricature. Horned helmets, mindless violence, grunting warriors. The real Vikings deserve better than that. They weren't perfect. They enslaved people. They could be brutal. They destroyed monasteries and killed innocent people. We shouldn't romanticize them. But we also shouldn't reduce them to Hollywood stereotypes. They were as complex as any people in history, more sophisticated in some ways than the civilized societies that wrote about them. The next time you watch a Viking movie, remember, almost everything you're seeing is fiction. The real Vikings were far more interesting than the myths. Thanks for watching. If this changed how you think about Vikings, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we're tackling the truth about samurai. And trust me, Hollywood lied about them too. Drop a comment. Which of these facts surprised you most? Did you know Vikings were this sophisticated? See you in the next one.